Welcome to The Bridge, Your Health, Your Voice, the official podcast for the University of Maryland, Baltimore School of Pharmacy Patients Program. The Patients Program is the bridge between the community and researchers. The Patients Program created this partnership to help researchers listen to the community's voice in order to build a bridge to an effective learning healthcare community. Here's your host, Rodney Elliott.
Thank you for taking the time out to talk to us here on The Bridge. Folks who are listening, I'm Rodney Elliott, the engagement specialist at the Patients Program, and I'm talking to Beverly Reddy, who is the founder and visionary of Ishsah's Place, a refuge for survivors of intimate partner violence and designed to promote holistic lifestyle transformations. I participated in Ishsah's Place walk a couple years in the past, and this is the first time I've actually had the opportunity to sit down with you and have a conversation about Ishsah's Place. And, we're going to dive right in. And I guess as we talk today, Beverly, being as though October is Domestic Violence Month, I thought that this was a fantastic opportunity for us to highlight and showcase an organization, a program that's doing tremendous work in our community, giving folks an opportunity to heal from such traumatic issues.
Thank you so much. And we thank you for the opportunity to share in this space today.
Yes,
so,
which kind of leads me to my very first question is kick us off. And as we get to conversating, folks, you'll get an opportunity to learn a little bit more about Beverly as well. So what inspired you to start Ishsah's Place? And did it come from a personal or professional experience that kind of shaped your decision?
Wow. Well, first, Ishsah's Place began as a ministry in my church at the Mount Lebanon Baptist Church. So there I am, an ordained minister, and it was during the time of preparation for ministry that I found this calling to serve women, right? Particularly women in the church or women of faith who were survivors of domestic violence. It was this time of preparation that we call Ministers in Training, or MIT. And so my pastor had posed a question to the other MITs, the other Ministers in Training, and myself during that time. And he asked us the question, what is it that God is calling you to do, right? And if that ministry is not something that we currently do here, how can we make that happen? How can we do that? And so it was, for me, I didn't feel like God was calling me to being on the usher board or, being a missionary or any of those kind of traditional ministries, right? So through a lot of prayer and meditation and spending time with God, I really felt like God was calling me to start this ministry for survivors, being a survivor myself. I am a survivor of domestic violence, 17 years removed now. And so I know what it felt like to be in the sanctuary and suffer in silence. And so for me, I felt like God was calling me to help other women become free of violence and free of abuse. And so my lived experience is what started as a ministry at Mount Lebanon Baptist Church. But we started with education, right? We just wanted to bring awareness. We wanted people to know that domestic violence existed, even in the faith community. And we wanted people to be educated on domestic violence. And so that's kind of where we started. But we always knew that God was calling us to do more than that. And so eventually, this ministry evolved into now a nonprofit organization, Ishsah's Place. Ishsah being the Hebrew word for woman or wife and woman. And so it is the woman's place. And you've said it a few minutes ago, where we really want to affirm the value of women and girls and make certain that survivors have the resources that they need. And so that my personal experience, and then you also mentioned professional.
Yeah.
And so for me, there's a scripture in Romans chapter 8, and it says, all things work together for the good of them that love God and are called according to God's purpose, right? And so for me, everything, my lived experience, my professional work, and so I've spent now 36 years in finance and healthcare, I have an undergraduate degree in business management. I have a master's degree in divinity. So all of those things, my lived experience, my professional life, all of those things have come together, I believe, to culminate in this ministry and this service that God has purposed in my life. And so that's how we get here.
Thank you for sharing that. And you shared a bunch of jewels in that initial opening, and you talking about the relationship of tremendous partner of the patients program over there with Pastor Lance and Lebanon Baptist Church. And for him to see in you that there was a calling, correct me if I'm wrong, a non-traditional calling, I would say, so to speak, but a need, because you mentioned a couple times in your answer about your lived experience that kind of shaped that. And when we're talking about starting something or having an opportunity to bring a resource to the community, you talk about the mission statement of Ishsah's Place. And I did a little research and to find out what Ishsah meant. You're talking about a woman, a wife, place. I think that's like, it's a fantastic place for women to land when they need help, when they need resources, right? A soft place to land, and with the support system over there. How has the evolution of a ministry and then now a nonprofit organization, that seems like a long journey. Like, what has that evolution been like since the very beginning?
Slow. I won't say painful. It's not been painstaking, but it has been a journey, right? So the ministry was birthed in 2012.
Okay.
So here we are in 2024. The organization is only about 3 years old now. Mm-hmm. So we're still a very young organization. But as I mentioned, we started with just wanting people to know, domestic violence. 1 in 4 women, right? 1 in 7 men are dealing with domestic violence, or also called intimate partner violence.
Yep.
We say that because we hear those terms used interchangeably. And so intimate partner violence, meaning it doesn't have to be somebody you live with, doesn't have to be someone in your domicile, doesn't have to be domestic, between your husband and a wife. It can be whoever you're dating. It can be the person that you're intimately involved with, but it's not your brother and your sister, right? And so...
to me, that sounds like part of the evolution, right? Because when you traditionally or have usually heard about domestic violence, you're thinking husband, wife, husband, or someone you're living with. But to include folks outside of that, meaning not necessarily living in the household, what made you want to stretch it to that? Not stretch it, that's the wrong word. What made you want to expand it to beyond the traditional way someone may have thought of what domestic violence is to interpersonal violence?
So it wasn't my idea to come up with the term. It's not my term. Let me just
Okay.
But intimate partner violence is a term, and interpersonal violence is a term that's used in the domestic violence community.
Okay.
Right. And so, but it is not simply about heterosexual. It between a man and a woman. So it crosses gender lines. It expands, and you can find it in any and every socioeconomic community.
Yes.
Right. And so, but we wanted people to know what it was, right, and to be educated on what it was. Yeah. And so to bring awareness is what we really started doing in the church, in the ministry. We've now evolved and expanded to providing services directly for survivors. And also to educating our teens about domestic violence. Because what we've learned is, particularly in the prevention program that we offer to teens, that, and I can say this because we're talking to the patients program, research has shown us.
Oh, I like that.
Research has shown us that dating violence starts as early as age 13 in our young people, right? And so for us, we're passionate about getting ahead of the curve, and making certain that our young people are educated, right, about dating violence, that they know what healthy relationships look like versus unhealthy relationships. right, and that they have the proper access to resources that they might need if they're even experiencing violence. And so we've expanded in that way. And also, as I mentioned, we've expanded also in the specific services that we provide to survivors. And so, we work with survivors to help them with safety planning, right? And so we want to make sure that they have the tools and resources available for them to make informed decisions. So not only are we, and we're still doing the awareness and education, but we want to make sure that survivors have what they need to start their journey of healing and wholeness. And so we don't tell them what to do. We don't tell them to leave. If they decide they want to stay, we still go through a safety planning process to help them be safe, whether they decide to stay or whether they decide to leave. But the choice is theirs to do that. But if they're leaving, they might need clothing. They might need food. Certainly, they need shelter, right? Emergency shelter care is one of the, I would say, one of the barriers to access to care, emergency shelter care. There are shelters, certainly around, homeless shelters, but shelters and transitional housing specific for survivors of domestic violence are scarce. And so helping them get connected with resources in that way.
I love to hear about all the ways you are supporting individuals who are suffering from this challenge of healing when it comes to healing from an abusive situation, particularly whether it's someone older, you even are getting ahead of the curve and being innovative and addressing some of the younger individuals. I love that. You use terminologies like lived experiences, and from your lived experiences, you found a way to meet the community where they are by being able to help folks who even want to maybe stay or, give it a little bit more time or give it a second chance. I think that's a fantastic resource and opportunity for folks to continue on, because what is evident about it, you have to continue on, or we want you to continue on after this trauma has happened, and hopefully be as healed and be able to navigate what's next going forward. And, when we talk about challenges that you've encountered, I'm pretty sure you may have encountered some challenges from the beginning to where you are now. Can you talk a little bit about that, maybe about some of what your biggest challenges have been along your journey?
Yeah, so I mentioned emergency shelter care, right? Excuse me. I would think that that bar none, that has been one of our biggest challenges, is trying to get survivors connected to emergency shelter care or transitional housing. It's particularly in Baltimore City. It's specifically for survivors of domestic violence. There are shelters specifically who support and care for survivors of domestic violence. Those resources are scarce. And so if there's not a shelter available, you have opportunities to perhaps put somebody up in a hotel temporarily until you can get them connected to resources. But certainly that's been a problem, trying to have beds available for women and children. And so that's been an issue or a challenge. I won't say an issue. That's been a challenge.
Okay.
We've also been challenged by, in some ways, a little bit access to services, right? Because in the Black community in particular, we don't talk about this stuff, right? It's quiet. We don't talk about it in our faith communities. We don't talk about it in our families. Our friends don't know about it. I mentioned a few minutes ago, suffering in silence, and women do that. We know that I'm sorry.
If you don't mind staying there a little bit, you're talking about suffering in silence, and in our community, people don't talk about it a lot. Like, what role does education play in that? Like, how can we educate folks to understand that either it's okay to talk about it, or Ishsah's place is a safe place where you can come and talk about it? How can we continue along that lines of educating folks to pass the word? Because I'm thinking maybe a friend might know that another friend is going through something. Maybe that friend can possibly help pass the word or pass some information to it. How can we continue to help educating folks about the importance of, finding a safe place to land or a soft place to land?
Yeah. So I'm so glad you asked that question. Education is everything. It's everything. And we know that when people are suffering in silence, sometimes friends know about it.
Okay.
Sometimes they can see the signs.
Yeah.
Family members, sometimes they can see the signs, but too often we turn a blind eye. Right? We turn our head in the other direction.
Not my business, not my issue.
Not my business.
Okay.
What happens in this family stays in this family. Right? We're not going to share it. But we want, in terms of educating and people, we want folks to know that help is available, that you don't have to stay there. You don't have to suffer in silence. And that's one of the reasons that we have, one of our programs works with the faith community. We know that the faith community, that pastors and faith leaders are one of the first places that we go to in the Black community for help. Always has been.
Okay.
But we've been ill-equipped to help survivors get the access to the resources that they need. Too often we've sent them back, unfortunately, into abusive households. We pray with them. We try to counsel them. And
sometimes it's just not enough, or sometimes
Yeah. And I would say that one of the things that our faith communities has done in the past is couples counseling. Don't do that. Don't do that. That causes more harm than help for the survivor. But we have a program now that's called, Safe Sanctuaries.
Okay.
And what we're doing with Safe Sanctuaries is we are bringing together faith leaders, pastors, domestic violence service providers, and other agencies, government agencies, all into the same space.
Okay.
Right. So we are educating the faith community on what domestic violence is, how to serve survivors, and we're connecting them with resources in the same space. And so they have opportunities to form partnerships with domestic violence service providers, with other agencies. They have opportunities to now provide warm handoffs. When I went to divinity school, none of the classes I ever had talked about domestic violence. We never had a class on domestic violence.
Okay.
And so when you go into ministry, you really are not prepared to care for survivors of domestic violence in terms of, what you've learned with your Master's of Divinity degree, right? They'll teach you how to run a church. They'll teach you how to, do a worship service, but we don't talk about things like domestic violence. It's always been quiet. It's always been hush-hush. But when we have this, now that we have this program, we are able to connect pastors with technical assistance and training that actually allows them to understand the dynamics of domestic violence and serving survivors and connecting them to resources. And so that's one part of the education. And then I also talked about the teen prevention. And so that's powerful in and of itself. As I said, if we can get ahead of the curve, then we're great. We're doing good.
Beverly, I want to commend you and your organization for being innovative and learning from your lived experiences, learning from your education background to recognize that, when I was in school, we weren't taught this. But when I go out to the community, when I go out into at my church and I hear about the issues that some of our members are going through, or even neighbors in our community are going through, you didn't necessarily have anything to reflect back on that kind of help. But you guys have developed two particular programs that support just that. It actually support pastors in your church, leaders in your church, and also neighboring churches, giving them the tools that they need to help members, folks in the community come out and help navigate that next step when it comes to trauma or when it comes to dealing with domestic violence issues. And even another innovative tool that I love, which is talking about educating the youth, meeting them where they are, because as we know, our youth are they're out there, they're a little active, and they're in schools, they're on social media, they're engaging with folks, and when they do come up with issues that they too may not be comfortable talking to their parents about, or maybe they're not comfortable talking to their friends about. But when they do, it's awesome to know that Mount Lebanon and Ishsah's Place has developed programs that support that. And I want to give kudos to you and your staff for finding ways to meet the community where they are, be innovative, and be assertive in this particular issue, because it's not going anywhere. Unfortunately, it's not going anywhere. But to have a resource where folks can reach out to, I think is awesome and fantastic. If there's a situation where you've been a part of, obviously, without saying any names, can you talk about some situations where you've had some success stories, where you've had some opportunities where Ishsah's Place has helped someone navigate the healing process? Because a lot of times we hear about the bad or the negative side of it, but I know there are some survivors out there. I know there are some folks who have found a way to keep going through. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we talked a few minutes ago about friends, right? And how they might be able to help survivors. And so some of the phone calls that come to us not only come specifically from survivors, but they come from friends, they come from family members, they come from other churches. So we recently had a case where we received a call from another church in the Baltimore city area. And they had someone who had come from a whole nother state, traveled from a whole nother state to escape domestic violence and needed help. Mm-hmm. That church did not have a domestic violence ministry, but they knew that we did. And so they reached out to us and asked us for help. And so we connected with the survivor who, as you might imagine, she was running for her life, right? So she grabbed whatever she could and she was gone. By the time she got here to Baltimore City, she needed everything. She needed clothing. She needed food. She needed funding. She needed shelter. She needed a place to stay. She didn't have a job. And so Ishsah's Place was able to help her get connected with some of those resources, right? We were able to connect her with domestic violence service providers who offered some services that we didn't. So we will help you with things like a security deposit if you find an apartment, or as I mentioned before, if there's not a shelter that's available, immediately readily available, we'll help you with perhaps hotel stays until you can get connected. We will even help with employment services. So as I mentioned, this person even needed she didn't have a job. Yeah. So we'll help you get your resume together. We'll help you do job search. We'll help you with interviewing skills. And so we were able to help her get connected with a number of resources that she needed to get on her feet right here in Baltimore City and start her journey to wholeness. And so we were grateful for that opportunity.
I was talking to a friend, a colleague at work, and I don't know how the topic came up, but a couple months or so ago, everyone got to notice that they were doing some type of emergency ring on your phone. Like they were like, how, for example, if a storm is coming or something, you'll get a big alert on your phone, no matter if it's iPhone or Android or whatever. But this alarm was going to alert every phone in America. And again, we were talking about a situation where someone had actually volunteered at a similar resource like Ishsah's Place for domestic violence, and they were sending out messages to folks who were using their services to say, hey, if you have your spare phone somewhere hidden in the house or hidden in the car or hidden in your gym bag or wherever it is, make sure you tend to that phone and, turn it off, because we don't want the abuser to know about your spare phone. And that made me sit back and think a little bit about some of the issues and challenges that someone does have or is going through when they are in a domestic violence abusive situation. So kudos again to the organization for finding ways to meet community members where they are, finding ways to be a service provider for folks here in Baltimore, but also folks, abroad. I think that's great, and
thank you.
It's sad that you guys got to continue to do this or continue to kind of build and find these different ways to help folks, but it's also a blessing too. So I can't commend you and the Ishsah's Place enough for that. Last two questions before we get out of here. Can you give some advice, or what kind of advice would you give someone who wants to support survivors or get involved in this fight against domestic and intimate partner violence?
So first I would say pray for clarity, right? And direction. But this is more than a notion, right? I would say also, most importantly, assess your why. Why do you want to do this? Why are you going to get involved? And in what way do you want to be involved? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? So obviously it's not about you. It's about helping others, but specifically in what area do you want to be helpful? And then I would suggest that you get educated and get trained before you just jump into it in full force. So one of the things that we did when I believed and I was certain that God was calling me to this ministry is I started volunteering at organizations that were domestic violence service providers or that provided services to survivors. And so I joined a speakers bureau for one of the domestic violence service providers, and I did training sessions. I went to places that were homeless shelters and spent time there. And so I would say get educated, understand what it is, get training, and start working with some domestic violence service providers before you try to go it alone.
I like that. Boots on the ground. Nothing like boots on the ground, getting out in and about that in that community or in those situations to kind of learn and see if you even know what your why is or get a better definition for what your why is, for sure.
Yeah.
But
start with why. Simon Sinek. Start with why. If you've never read that book.
Oh, what's the book again? You mind repeating that?
Simon Sinek is the author. Sinek, I believe, and the book is Start with Why.
Start with why.
Start with why.
And add that to my book rotation. Beverly, as always, it was great seeing you. Great talking to you. Hopefully, you guys will be have a great event in October, but more importantly, you guys will continue to get the resources, things you need for the help that you're providing for members here in Baltimore, Mount Lebanon, and abroad.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to The Bridge. Your health, your voice. To learn more about the Patience Program, visit our website at www.patience.umaryland.edu.